Hello folks, welcome to the channel. Did a video here a while back about trees, and I do enjoy talking about trees, so I thought I'd add to that in today's video. We'll find some more species and talk about them just a little bit. I'm going to start right over there, so come along and join me. We'll get right into it. So here's the first species for today. This is Sourwood. Scientific name would be Oxydendrum arboreum, and that is in the Ericaceae family, the heath family. So this one's kind of interesting. This contains a lot of oxalic acid in the leaves, which actually gives it a sour taste when you go to eat them. Quite handy when you're wandering around in the woods and you find yourself getting a bit of cotton mouth if you haven't been drinking a whole lot or don't have much water along with you out working around outside. So I'm going to get one of these leaves off here and we'll go over that just a little bit. So hopefully the camera will be able to pick this up. Let me come over here. So if you look along the back of the leaf, I'm going to hold that right up there, hopefully that's picking up. There are very small hairs along the midrib on the underside of the leaf. Right, so there's the top of the leaf, and when you flip it over you can see that midrib is quite distinct there and has a lot of very, very small hairs, which I hope are picking up in the camera view there. But those little small hairs there are quite distinct for sourwood, and you can eat this whole leaf just like it is. Now I should say, you should do your own research before you go around eating things in the woods. Can be a very dangerous thing to do if you don't know what you're doing. But with practice and knowledge, it can be pretty safe. But this is good to eat. You can just eat the whole leaf just like it is. And it is incredibly sour. It's got a kick to it. Whew, that's a good one. That's one of the more sour leaves I've eaten in a long time. Wow, that's a good one. But yeah, it's a really good one. So there's a little bit about the leaf. Now I'm looking at one right there. It's a larger one. We'll go take a look at the bark and the form of a more mature tree. So here we go. So here I'm holding the camera so that I can show the form of this larger sourwood tree. I would probably put this individual in a pole classification. It's not real big, but it's very, very usable size. And just so everybody's clear, where's my finger? This trunk right here, that is the one I'm talking about, the really, really crooked one there. So now we'll go over and get a closer look at that bark and talk a little bit more about it. Alright, so here is a better look at the bark on this particular sourwood tree here. And you can see these fairly deep furrows there and relatively long ridges. As the species matures, those furrows will get even deeper and very, very noticeable. Very easy to pick up even from a distance, especially when coupled with the rather strange growth form where it kind of just grows all over the place. As it gets bigger, sourwood will often develop somewhat of an orange color down in the bottom of the furrows, which definitely helps in identification. There are a few species that this is commonly confused with, one of which would be black locust. The bark color is rather similar in some situations, in some instances, if I could talk. The bark form can be quite similar also, but especially with a bigger one, it's really easy to pick up sourwood mainly because of the deep furrows with the orange color in the bottom. Now, I mentioned the really crooked growth on this. So this is a phototropic species, meaning that it grows toward light. So this will commonly be found more or less below the canopy in a closed canopy forest, and it will seek out openings where it can excuse me, where it can get the most light in order to perform photosynthesis and grow as a plant does. But given the really crooked nature of the trunk, it's quite useful for a lot of things. Once upon a time, people used these for sleds, for the runners on sleds, rock boats, things like that, because it's a really, really tough wood, and it already has the curve in place for the front of the runner so that it doesn't dig into the ground. It kind of rides on top as you pull it. So, good species to know. Really useful wood, very hard wood, and also edible leaves if you like sour things. Quite good. So here's the next species for today, striped maple. This is Acer pennsylvanicum in Aceraceae, in the maple family. Now it's kind of dark, so you can't see the bark very well in the video, but that was the only flat spot to put my tripod, in this particular spot. So I'll get a shot of the bark in a moment so you can see that. But I want to start here with the leaves. Alright, so I'll bring this around here. I'll put that right up there. Very, very unique leaves, I'll say. So striped maple often comes out with pairs of leaves, as you see there. Every spot where there is a leaf on this tree, there are two coming out. If we compare that to something like a red maple, a lot of times, especially toward the end of the branch, they'll come out with usually more than two, like maybe 4 or 6 or something like that leaves at the end. But this one is almost always 2 in my experience. Long tapering points there, very, very long and slender. Generally 5 lobes, as you can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but the top 3 are the most noticeable on this species. If you look at the top of the leaf, it's got a bit of a pillow effect, or a quilted effect on the top, where the blade tissue itself kind of puffs up a little bit in between all of the veins that run through the leaf. So there's veins running this way and some smaller lateral veins coming off of each of those, and the leaf blade in between is raised above. So it's kind of cool. If you look at it from the top, it's just a little bit rolly, so that's kind of neat. But this is a very, very common species in the mountains here where I live in East Tennessee. Usually most common lower down, lower elevations, especially near water. Striped maple really, really likes water. You can find it up higher. I'm on a bit of a ridge here, but the elevation is not as high as say the average elevation in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I'm a little bit lower here. But awesome tree. A couple of neat things about this one: the wood is very, very soft. I really like to use this for carving. The grain doesn't react as well as some other things to carving, but the wood itself is very, very soft. American basswood is often considered a prized species for carving, but here where I live, willow also, but here where I live, striped maple is one of my favorites. So I'm going to quit talking about this one now, and I'll come over here and give you a shot of the bark, and I'll talk a little bit while I'm showing that. There we go. So there you can see these stripes here that run along the length of the trunk. The bark is more or less green. Kind of looks a little bit camouflaged sometimes, because it does tend to have darker and lighter green within, and then these very light colored, usually white, but I have seen some sort of off-white or cream colored stripes running along there. And that's where it gets the name striped maple. So here we have the eastern hemlock. This is Tsuga canadensis in the Pinaceae. It's in the pine family. This is a very, very common species here in the mountains. Also over on the Cumberland Plateau, if you live in Tennessee and up into Kentucky. It's a very common species. Unfortunately, it is not as common as it once was, and will probably continue to become less common due to an insect known as the hemlock woolly adelgid. I'm going to bring this down here and show that right there. You can see all those white things on the underside of the twig there. Those are the insect that is wreaking havoc on this species. They're little sucking insects that get in there and essentially suck the life out of the tree. So that's unfortunate. If you find yourself in a public area where these trees are growing, you may see at the bottom of the trunk it's been marked with blue paint. That probably means it's been treated with an insecticide, more than likely imidacloprid. That's typically the most common thing to use for this eradication of that pest. But eastern hemlock is quite a useful species. Has a really hard wood, especially for a conifer. It's very, very hard. Actually was chopping down a dead hemlock one time, and the wood inside was so hard that it chipped my axe just a little bit. So it's extremely hard wood, which is really cool. Burns really, really hot. It actually makes a pretty good fuel wood for fire, and it doesn't tend to smoke or put off as much, noxious badness that will collect inside your chimney like a pine would do. One thing about it though is, especially with smaller twigs like these right here, these burn incredibly hot. It's one of my favorite things to use for kindling when I'm up here in the mountains. Burns incredibly hot, but it does pop a lot. So I wouldn't suggest using that around synthetic clothing or underneath a tarp necessarily, unless you have a canvas tarp or something like that. But it will burn holes in synthetic materials. It'll do that in a hurry. But eastern hemlock is a good one. I've talked enough now. I think I'll go ahead and mention a little bit about identification, if I can get that branch out of my ear. But if you look at the underside of the needles, and it's going to be hard to show this in the video, so I'll get a picture and put up right after this. But on the undersides of the needles, there are two little white lines that run along there. And the needles are typically arranged in a single plane, right? There'll be two rows of needles along each side of the twig. If you happen to find something that looks like an eastern hemlock, but the needles are not necessarily in a straight line, they sort of spiral or encircle the twig, you might have found a Carolina hemlock. In which case, good on you. I have never found one. They are incredibly uncommon, but I would love to find one. So if you do find one, let me know where it's at, because I might want to come take a picture of it. But yeah, so eastern hemlock, really, really good one. There's a larger one off over this way. I'll get a little bit of a close-up on the bark. That's more like what you might see wandering around in the woods. So this individual shows better bark than the one I was standing next to previously. It was fine, but I like to try to find things that look like you might see a picture of it in a book. That one, nobody would put a picture of that in a book. This one, I would say, is definitely book worthy as far as the bark goes. Kind of scaly bark. You see there, very gray color usually. Sometimes they can be a little bit more brown than this, but I tend to see a lot of gray like this. But very scaly. You can see there's little bits that are raised off the trunk just a little bit there. But really no ridges, no furrows to speak of, just kind of relatively uniform all the way around, in a way. But yeah, so there we go. There is a really nice example of eastern hemlock bark. Last species for today, shortleaf pine. This is Pinus echinata in Pinaceae. It's in the pine family, if you would believe it. But this species actually was what I worked with on my master's research project. My master's thesis was about shortleaf pine seedlings. We were looking at different planting patterns with these, looking at seedling performance, vegetation responses, and all kinds of fun science stuff like that. But shortleaf pine, you might think would have a short leaf, and actually pine needle is a leaf. I feel like I should say that. People generally think of a leaf as something off of a maple tree or an oak tree, but conifers also have leaves. The technical term for a conifer leaf is a acicular. That is the name of the leaf shape. There are lots of different leaf shape names, deltoid, ovoid, reniform, lots of different names if you want to go down that rabbit hole. But I can't show the leaves on this because there are no short ones nearby that I am aware of, and the needles on this tree are about 50 feet above my head, so I can't reach those. But I will say that they are, what is that? They're probably 3 to 4 inches long, somewhere in that range, I would say. If I'm wrong, I'll put up an accurate number on screen. But they occur in bundles or fascicles of 2 needles in a really nice green color. The big thing for identifying shortleaf pine, though, actually has to do with the bark. You notice all of these big plates, right? So this whole section right there, that's the size of the palm of my hand, that is a single plate. There's one here, and they continue all the way up the tree. All right, it is kind of flaky. Now they come off in layers, but large plates that flake off, right? That's one thing to look for. Dr. Buckley, who actually was my graduate advisor and undergraduate advisor, likes to describe this to dendrology students as a giraffe pattern. Right? If you think of a giraffe's neck, the splotches of brown are sort of like the plates on shortleaf pine, and I kind of like that description. But yeah, so there's that. And there's another thing that's really cool that I'm going to have to bring the camera over to show you up close on each of these plates. So I'm going to do that right now. There we go. So I'm zoomed in here. And if you notice, on these plates, there are these little holes that look almost like moon craters or miniature volcanoes. Those are a huge identifying characteristic for shortleaf pine. No other pine that I'm aware of has that characteristic. So if you walk up to a pine tree and you see that on the bark, it's almost certainly a shortleaf pine. So, pretty cool stuff. Well, there we go. That is 4 species. Talked about a little bit, discussed a little bit of identification, some uses here and there. It was a good time. I like talking about trees. I kept it at 4, and I tried to keep each of those 4 as brief as possible so that the video didn't go any longer than necessary. I do like to talk. If you ever get me talking about trees in person, prepare to be there for a while, because I can just talk and ramble, and I find it very, very enjoyable. So, but I hope that you found this video enjoyable, entertaining, informative, all of the above. And if so, I would greatly appreciate it if you would hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, share the video with your friends, and leave a comment down below, especially if you know where there's a Carolina hemlock, because I would love to find one. But yeah, until next time, go forth, enjoy yourself, and always come home safe.